Giles, good morning, and thank you so much for having the chance to talk to you today in advance of your talk later this week about your book, China and the Credit Crisis, which is extremely timely and very interesting. And I know you wrote it now 12 years ago, but could we start off by my asking you on behalf of the Asia Scotland Institute what it was that led you to write this book when you did?
Okay, well, the starting point for the book, China and the Credit Crisis, the Emergence of a New World Order, which I wrote actually in spring and summer of 2009, was inspired, I suppose, to start with, by the fact that I got involved with China in the late 1980s, having met a Chinese economist at the World Bank in 1984 and married her in 1988 in London. I went to China, fascinated by it, and then sort of realized that the Chinese were going forwards, not backwards. We started advising multinationals in China in 1989, companies like Rolls-Royce, Vodafone, etc. And I became very familiar with China through the 90s. And I could see that China was very much on a roll and everything was going forwards. That was the first thing. Then I became familiar with the focus on exports, really inspired by the Asian crisis in 1997-98, when you remember that Asia kind of collapsed, domino-like, Thailand, South Korea, and so forth. And China felt very threatened by that. Xu Rongji was keen to promote exports, and that really started a huge export boom, which it was starting already, but it really promoted it. I then also noticed around that time, or slightly later, the beginning of a disinflationary period of state of affairs in the Western economy and in America and in Europe. And I linked the tremendous export drive from China with that disinflation. That's what started me thinking about the relationship. When the credit crisis happened in 2008, I thought back to this link between what China, globalization so-called, and disinflation or deflation. And then I thought also about the search for yield in 2003 in New York, the tremendous leverage which was built up focusing on real estate, and then the crash in 2008, which bankrupted two major firms and threatened several others until the bailout. The final sort of thing which really made me think about writing the book was that I met somebody called James Mirrlees at a party at Peking University when I was teaching there in 2009. James Mirrlees was the supervisor at Oxford University of my friend Zhang Weiying, then the dean of the business school at Peking University. And I met him at a cocktail or a supper party, and we just ended up talking to each other. And I found him delightful, very modest man. You would never have dreamt that he won the Nobel Prize for Economics. And he started talking to me, asking me what I was doing. And because I was thinking about this idea, I talked to him about it. And he said, that's very interesting. And I think you're right. I think you should write about it. So it was the inspiration of a Nobel Prize winner that really convinced me to set pen to paper. Otherwise, I don't think I would have.
Later on, Giles, you write about the fact that there was a sort of lack of attention paid to what was going on by the IMF and others. And I wonder if you could comment on that, and also what impact the entry of China into the World Trade Organization had later.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because I did also feel very much in the late 90s, and certainly around the time of the dot-com boom and subsequent to that really nobody was really at all interested in what was going on in China. At least they were not connecting it at all with events that were going on in the West. That may have been partly because I think after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1990 and the publication of that famous book, The End of History, by Francis Fukuyama in California, I think it was in 1992.
Yeah.
The West generally, and the Americans in particular, were convinced that it really was the end and democracy had won. And so everything was going to be great and democracy would win all over the place. And I don't think they were terribly interested in what was going on in China or anywhere else. So I do think that led to a certain amount of ignorance and overlooking of what was happening. And certainly it's true that they ignored that developments in China until very recently. And I think that's part of the reason why this link, the true nature of the disinflation or deflation that was happening was not understood by Bernanke and the economic policymakers at the time.
Giles, in our sort of just short talk now, which I'm going to bring to a conclusion soon, can you give me a feel for how you see the future developing? China growing more powerful, supply chains being managed more effectively. How do you see things developing? Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about supply chains being moved out of China, and certainly a lot of restructuring of supply chains in the last 3 or 4 years, certainly since COVID. But actually what's happened mostly is that supply chains have moved into China, and most people sourcing from China are sourcing as much or more than they did before. I noticed that November 2021 exports from China, Chinese exports rose 21% year on year. And the trade surplus for China in November 2021 was around $75 billion. That's just a monthly figure. So, you know, I think that China's sourcing and exporting the equipment, all the clothing for the COVID, electronics and other COVID-related items, I think they've done, you know, pretty well out of. Going forward, I think that there's a lot of feeling about. I've just been reading China Research Group's daily report and the follow-on from the publicity last week about Christine Lee, the so-called Chinese spy at the heart of government in UK, influencing various MPs. And there's going to be an inquiry into that. There's a lot of feeling in Britain and America and other places about China being a threat. My own feeling is that we should try to develop a constructive relationship with China. We should try to understand them better, at the same time as making it clear to them, you know, what our concerns are. And I think the Chinese will be perfectly happy with that. If we try to cut ourselves off completely from China, as many people want to do, China will simply follow its own natural instincts, which it has before, and turn inward more and more. And that's actually what's already started happening.
Giles, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And what you've just said accords completely with our own mission at the Age of Scotland Institute, which is to increase people's understanding of the different countries that make up Asia, and in particular China. And we will only be able to do business with them if we better understand how they think, where they're coming from, and what the dynamics are that drive their society. So for your book, which we're going to talk about at greater length shortly in a couple of days' time with Andrew Milligan, our board member, I'm very, very grateful to you, and thanks for this opportunity to record you there in La Belle France. Only one other thing I'd say, which we may cut out of this recording, which is that Donald Trump's clothing for his Make America Great Again campaigns was all made in China. The baseball caps, the t-shirts, the lot. So there you go. Good. Okay. So speak to you again soon, and thank you very much indeed.